You know why JoJo's is so good? Because Araki takes inspiration from a lot of different things, not just other manga. Anytime he needs to draw a new JoJo pose, he pulls out books on Greek and Roman statues to draw inspiration from. Everybody knows that every character after Part 3 is named after a different musician, song, or fashion designer. Oda is the same way with One Piece. Every character is based on a famous person from real life, my favorite of which is Emporio Ivankov and Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror. Miura from Berserk draws direct inspiration from Hieronymus Bosch paintings for his backgrounds. Every mangaka takes inspiration from different things that produce the manga that we illegally download, translate, and read every week. I genuinely believe that the one most egregious thing that a creative person can do is limit the media that they consume, because you never know where your inspiration is going to come from. Which is why it really bothers me when weebs say, "I'll never read a comic book ever, they're just not fun to read or nothing cool happens in them." That's a direct quote from a friend, by the way, and I don't want it to seem like I'm hitting on all weebs. If it's a weeb who read a comic and said, "This just wasn't my thing," that's totally cool with me. I'm talking about the people who don't even give comics a chance before saying that they're no good. This video is for those weebs and anybody else who wants to get into comic books. By the way, I know there have been a lot of anime and manga based on American superheroes, but I'm not going to talk about those today. This video is just about comics. Comics are pretty much the same thing as manga, except that they're usually produced in glorious 1080p 40 Technicolor, and they're released monthly instead of weekly. And for those of you thinking to yourselves, comics just don't have the same things as manga. What do you need? Pretty boys doing stuff well? We got that. Slice of life? We absolutely got that. Blood, guts, and battles? Of course we have that. Tournament arcs? Oh, you know we got that. I'll concede that comics are hard to get into if you don't know anything about them, but that's why you got me. Your boy Spam from my apartment's got you. First, let's talk about price. Yes, comics can be expensive, especially for only 22 pages a month. So the way to go is digital. Hop on over to Comixology because they have massive sales that are basically Steam summer sales but for comics. Also check out Comixology Unlimited. They have a rotating selection of comics from every major comic book publisher in the West. Hashtag not an ad, hashtag could be an ad at Comixology. If you want to exclusively read DC or Marvel, they've got subscription services too. DC has DC Universe, which has pretty much every comic they've ever released since OG Action Comics #1 for those retro boyos to all that recent stuff. They also have every DC television show and movie you could ever need. Watch Young Justice if you're ever in the need for a superhero anime. If you want to read Marvel because you saw the movies, then hit up Marvel Unlimited for lots of comics, but sadly no TV. Psst. Also, you didn't hear it from me, but you can also get comics the same way you get manga. Sailing the seas of the World Wide Web, mateys. As for the ridiculous reading orders you may have seen here or there, yes, reading comics can be confusing sometimes, but if you can make sense of the Fate timeline and all of the Gundam universes, then you can make sense of comic books. Superman and Batman celebrated their 1000th issue recently, but don't worry, you don't have to read all of that to get into the new stuff. That would be insane. Here's looking at you, every long-running shonen ever. Comic books have reboots pretty often so readers can jump in without needing to know decades of character history. And you don't even have to start there either. Each new arc makes it so that you can pretty easily jump into it when it starts. Before I start, I want to say that there will be very, very, very mild spoilers for each series' first arc because I need to talk about the themes of each comic. Also, these are some of my favorite comics ever, so if you don't like them, I will definitely cry. Now let's get into these bad boys. I'm going to ease you guys into the world of comic books by hitting you with a mantra. Yes, you heard that right. Not a manga, not a manhwa or a manhwa, it's a mantra. French manga. This is manga with baguettes, butter, and intense protesting. If you didn't get that joke, Google French protest because the French sure do love to protest. In the world of Radiant, these creatures called Nemesis suddenly appeared from the sky and proceeded to wreak havoc on the world. Sometimes they attack people, and if those people survive, they become sorcerers, and naturally, only sorcerers can defeat the Nemesis. The main guy, Seth, is a sorcerer who dreams of defeating every Nemesis and creating peace in the world between sorcerers and humans, and also wants to become Hokage. If that sounds like literally every shonen ever, that's a good thing. The author and artist Tony Valente loves shonen and wanted to create his own for people to enjoy. It's got everything you could expect from shonen to have, especially in the first few chapters, but then it evolves into its own thing from those tropes to become one of my favorite manga of the last few years, because it's damn good. The best part of Radiant is definitely the world building. Valente took his time crafting all the aspects of the world so that it all fits in like a really good puzzle. Like that puzzle about horses you bought to do with your family during lockdown. Radiant equals Horse Puzzles 2020, heard it here first, boys. The characters are interesting, but the way they fit into the world is even more interesting. It's such an easy middle ground between manga and comics that it even has its own anime. Yeah, that's right, the same guys that made Assassination Classroom made this anime about sorcerers, and you know what? The first season's just okay, but the second season is pretty good. It's got 13 volumes so far, and it's a refreshing reinvention of shonen manga with a French twist, while also being super good at paying homage to the series that came before it. Here we go, lads. We're getting into real comics now. Deadly Class doesn't hold anything back. It's all blood, guts, and punk rock. The series takes place in a darker and edgier version of the late 80s. Marcus Lopez Arguello is the newest student at King's Dominion Atelier of the Deadly Arts. As you can probably tell from the name, this is not a school for nice boys and girls, but not like the ones that got put in the corner during recess. Instead, it's the ones who kill people for money. Marcus has one goal: kill the man who ruined his life, Ronald Reagan. The best thing that I can say about this series is that I discovered it after watching the television adaptation, then I read the first 43 issues and rewatched the television series while waiting for the 44th chapter, and that 44th chapter was amazing. Before I get into the themes, I want to talk about the art. God damn, the art is just so... It's absolutely insane, especially during the drug trips that the kids go on once or twice. Wes Craig very quickly made his way under my list of favorite comic artists after I read this. If you've ever felt an intense sense of disaffectedness from society, or if you've ever felt like the world was out to get you, this series is for you. If you've ever felt angry or sad or betrayed for no reason, this series is for you. If you've ever felt super hikikomori or watched Welcome to the NHK, then you should really read Deadly Class. Quick end note, if you even sort of have an interest in punk rock, read this. The writer Rick Remender loves punk so much, pretty much every book he's ever written is named after a classic punk album. This is going to be your first traditional superhero comic of the day, and it's from Robert Kirkman. Yes, that Robert Kirkman. The best way I can describe this series I stole from a Reddit comment. It's basically Superman doing DBZ style fights, and it's bloody as all hell. That's absolutely the best thing anybody could say about it. Invincible is set in a world where superheroes are pretty commonplace. It follows Mark Grayson, the son of the world's greatest hero, Omni-Man. When Mark turns 17, his superpowers awaken and he becomes the world's newest superhero, Invincible. The comic is a coming-of-age superhero story that follows Mark as a teenager up until he becomes the world's greatest superhero. This is another comic that starts off with a shonen-like plot, but it very quickly evolves to have Berserk and One Piece levels of storytelling because it's a superhero story for adults. Invincible is dark for a lot of reasons, but it also has this strong underlying sense of hope to it. Mark suffers consequences, both good and bad, for his actions, which all lead to his development as a character. There are 144 issues of pure, buttery, smooth superhero action mixed with the story of a kid learning to be a man. I heavily recommend reading the shit out of every single issue because it's one of the best superhero stories ever put to paper. After the turn of the millennium, aka 2000, aka 2 years post my birth, comic demigods Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley decided to reboot SpiderMan. They brought every character into the 21st century by updating their backstories for the new century. They took Spidey's 11-page origin story and made it into this sprawling 180-page saga of a normal kid from Brooklyn becoming the world's newest symbol of hope. And that was so popular they decided to do it for like 10 more years. The world's symbol of hope sounds familiar. It's because Horikoshi's favorite superhero is Spider-Man, and he based a lot of Deku and My Hero's story on Spidey's journey. If you've never read comics, and that's you, beautiful viewer, this is a perfect way to get you into the larger Marvel universe. No previous knowledge necessary. Since this is a new universe, some things are changed around, but it's still one of the best Spider-Man stories ever made. This is another coming-of-age superhero story. If you're a teenager realizing the world is full of responsibilities you never expected, then this is the story for you. I was kind of hesitant to put this one on the list because you need to know some pretty serious Batman backstory for this one. And that backstory is that Batman is a superhero and his real name is Bruce Wayne. He also has lots of sidekicks, like he's indoctrinated a shocking amount of child soldiers into his war against crime. The series starts with Batman doing his nightly rounds through Gotham City, taking down bad guys as he goes, while talking about what Gotham means to him as a person and as Batman. And this is probably the best introductory issue to Batman ever made because it could be your first issue or your 100th issue, but it still has the distilled essence of Batman. After the first 9 or so issues, the writer-artist duo, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, became one of my comic book creator dream teams because they really did something special here. Capullo's art has become the de facto way I imagine most of these characters because the designs are so fresh and so clean. His layouts have this intense kinetic energy to them when the characters move. He also has this way of changing the usual panel format to this free-flowing composition that is just so... I also have to talk about how good Snyder's writing is, because it's as good as freshly baked cookies from your grandma. He really wanted to innovate what a Batman story was and looked like. The entire 52-issue run makes for this sweeping, almost cinematic story about what it means to be Batman and what Batman's family means to him. It really changed the way I look at Batman now. He also does the super verbose, wordy speeches that break down the methodology that Batman uses when breaking down a case at the end of each issue. The series is pretty much everything you could need to know about Batman. It even has this lengthy flashback sequence that shows you Batman's first year as a Caped Crusader. It's called 0 Year, and it's incredibly badass. This is probably going to be the hardest to read because there will be some references to stuff from other comics that they'll point out, but reading that isn't really necessary to understand the story here. I'll put a link to the full reading order below, but start at issue 1, then go all the way to 22, read issue 0, then keep reading as normal until the end. Yeah, it's kind of confusing, but so is being alive, so get used to it. I'm kidding. Please read. It's so darn good. This is the series that got me back into comics after I stopped reading in 2009 because a girl said comics weren't cool. Joke's on her though, because comics are the coolest thing ever now. We finally arrived at my favorite comic on this list, and probably of all time. You might know Hellboy from Guillermo del Toro's fantastic movies, which is how I got into them. If you haven't seen those though, watch them. They're a pretty good introduction into the character. The Hellboy comic is probably one of the best things in the universe. Like, honestly, we got the universe at number 4, at number 3, the smooth sounds of Nina Simone, at number 2, freshly caught, freshly grilled fish, and at number 1, we have Hellboy. Hellboy follows Hellboy, the boy from hell. He was summoned by Nazis during World War II to help them win the war, but he was actually found and raised by the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. Quick side note, you should know that Hitler had a whole division of Nazis just to research spooky paranormal stuff, and it's actually quite interesting. Back to it. When Hellboy's all grown up, he's basically a big, strong, red Indiana Jones who's also an exorcist, and he's trying to find out what happened to his adoptive father. And I could gush about Hellboy for hours, but the first thing I have to talk about is the art. Mignola is my favorite comic artist because of his dark, gothic, Lovecraftian style that fits the story so fantastically well. Second side note, he's probably like 75% of why I love frogs so much. The other 25% is from Naruto and my thick boy Gamabunta. If you Google the Hellboy timeline, it can seem very daunting at first, but you don't need to read all of that to get the pure, blessed story. I'll link it below though because it's really cool and an amazing read. Pretty much every Hellboy story is divided into separate arcs that you can easily read in sequence. Start with Seed of Destruction, then read the collection of short stories, then fall in love from there because it really is an amazing story. The stories also involve a lot of folklore and mythology, so if you're a Percy Jackson boy, then you'll really love this. Hellboy's story is incredibly ornate and well built. There is not a more touching, make you cry your heart out while wanting to be a better person story in this world. There have been several times where I find myself crying after reading a Hellboy story. There are hundreds of poignant and heartfelt moments scattered throughout the pages that will leave you thinking about them for days after reading. And that was my overly exaggerated explanation of why you should read comic books, because they're basically the same thing as manga. Let me tell you, as someone who's read a lot of manga and comic books and everything in between, the story of Hercules is basically Naruto's story if you replace the chakra gods with the Greek gods. All of the tropes you associate with manga storytelling aren't unique to manga alone. Trust me, you will not regret getting into comics, my weeb boys and girls, unless you spend all of your money on them, which I suggest you don't do, but I have done, so I will not stop you. Besides, you were probably going to spend all of that money on a Hestia or Saber statue anyway. Hope you're having a wonderful day. I wanted to leave you with this piece of basic fatherly advice I found in a fortune cookie. Today is the youngest you'll ever be again, so live like it. As always, this video has been spam from my apartment.